From the NFL Scouting Combine in Indianapolis, Indiana, Sports4CLE continues, and we are pleased to be joined by the Browns beat reporter from Plain Dealer, cleveland.com, Dan Labbe. Dan, as always, appreciate the time. You listened to all of Andrew Berry today. What stood out to you?
Andrew never says much, right? Like we've been around him so long. We understand the beats. We understand the things that he's just not going to answer, even though you gotta ask him. But I thought, I think one of the things is this trade deadline. And Andrew is a very aggressive GM when it comes to trades. He's really built this roster and filled holes with trades. A lot of that has come in the offseason. He hasn't really made a lot of trades in season. I think it's interesting he wants that moved back a couple weeks. If maybe that allows him to be more aggressive. If there's some competitive advantage there for a guy who kind of approaches it like an NBA GM in some ways. He loves to get those day 3 picks. That's how he got Dustin Hopkins, Adarius Smith, Amari Cooper, and then of course the big trade was the Deshaun Watson trade. He loves to use trades, and so I thought that stood out to me, that he wants that moved back to kind of fit a little more in line with what the NBA does, what baseball does. So you have a little more time to kind of see who you are as a football team, and maybe see if some other teams kind of decide they're out of it and want to give up some talent. I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, and he went through the rationale and had comparisons to the level of games played at the trade deadline for all the sports, and he made a very compelling case. When you look at the tackle position, and I know you asked about this, it's interesting. You've got 3 guys that have started in the NFL and project to be starters in Dwan Jones, Jedrick Wills, and Jack Conklin. Conklin's been beat up.
Yeah, and Andrew said it's a good problem to have, right? Which he's not wrong. We saw that with the injuries this year. Anybody can get hurt at any time. You got to have tackles. But I think this is a really interesting scenario because you have 3 tackles who are going to expect to start. Jack Conklin's not here to be a backup. Dwan Jones got that taste of starting last year, and he's good enough to do it. So he's going to want to start. And Jed Wills playing on his 5th-year option. You got to have an answer on him this year, and he's going to want to start. So it's not so much a money thing because Dwan Jones isn't making that much money, but it's kind of an ego thing, right? And that's not to say that, Jack Conklin's going to cause a ruckus behind the scenes if you say you can't start, but he's not going to be happy to not start. He still wants to be a starting tackle, and he's good enough when he's healthy to be a starting tackle in this league. So that's really going to be, we're going to have to ask Kevin about that really tomorrow, because that's going to be something Kevin has to manage if they have all 3 of these players healthy and on the roster. Somebody's going to be unhappy.
The other thing that was interesting, shortly after that, somebody asked him about just the value they place on offensive linemen, and he said we're always going to put a value on them.
Yeah, he wants to build in the trenches, and that's something that comes from Philly. That's something that Howie Roseman loves to build in the trenches, and that's something that Andrew has always been a proponent of. They want to have a strong offensive line. And think about some of his first moves, right? His first draft pick was Jedrick Wills. Signed Jack Conklin in free agency. He extended Joel Bitonio and Wyatt Teller. I believe that was in 2021. They go out and they get Ethan Posick when Nick Harris gets, before Nick Harris gets hurt, but they kind of fortified that position, and then they extended Posick when he showed he could do the job. So offensive line is really important. Defensive line is really important. This team loves linemen. They're going to continue to invest in that position, whether it's draft picks, money. They're going to pay guys.
So when you look at the roster, a lot has been made about wide receiver depth. What are your thoughts? What do you think about the wide receiving core?
I think they need to add some. I'm a little nervous about what they've got there. Obviously, Amari Cooper is great, and he just continues. I don't know how many times this last season he made a catch, and I'm like, I can't believe he got his feet down. I can't believe he held on to that football. He just continues to do it. Obviously, he's getting a little older, but I think you've still got some years that you can get out of him. I'm just worried behind him what you have. I don't think Elijah Moore is cast right if he's your number 2. I think he needs to be your number 3 or your slot guy. I don't know if Cedric Tillman is ready. I'd be nervous kind of rolling the dice on that without some sort of plan B. David Belt did some nice things. I just don't know if he's a guy you can count on. So I think they've got to address that position. I don't know if using the 54th pick is enough to do that, but they've got to find something they can do there. I'd love to see them go out and spend some money there. I don't know if they have the appetite to do that. I would have loved a T. Higgins. Mike Evans, if he hits the market. I know a lot of these guys are we're hearing the right things. Obviously, they franchised Higgins. Jason Licht said all the right things about Mike Evans today. But if there's a big name receiver out there, again, watch that trade market. I'd love to see them go and get a guy to be like your number 2. And then maybe if he's young enough, eventually your number 1, when Amari, who is 30 years old, you kind of have to move on from him.
Some of the names that you hear in free agency, Gabe Davis, I mean, you draw the parallel, obviously, to Ken Dorsey, the new offensive coordinator. What are your thoughts on Davis?
I think he'd be good. I don't think you bring him in as like your number 2 necessarily, but I think he's a good player. It's funny, sometimes you go on Twitter and you see Bills fans, they are thrilled that he's gone, but that's a very small sample size. I think Gabe Davis is a good player. I think that connection with Dorsey is big. And, I talked to one of our colleagues who covers the Bills. He said that Gabe Davis loves playing for Ken Dorsey. So I think that's a pretty natural match. And that's a guy that's produced in the NFL. So I would be all about bringing in a guy like that. But I also still think, if you can't get T. Higgins, maybe Tyler Boyd.
Right.
He's more of a slot guy, but he would be interesting, I think, too. He just catches a ton of passes, converts a bunch of third downs. So I think he'd be an interesting name to keep in mind, too.
Remade the offensive staff this year. Dorsey, Dickerson, Tommy Rees. What do you think the idea, the thought behind that is?
I think so much of it is about, and this isn't a surprise, it's about Deshaun. I mean, you just look at, take Dickerson out of the equation. You bring in Tommy Rees to be your tight ends coach, but that's a quarterback guy, right? He played quarterback. He's coached quarterbacks. He's been an OC. Obviously, Ken Dorsey, you look at his background. He worked with Cam Newton. He worked with Josh Allen, and those are different guys than Deshaun Watson. They run differently. You don't want Deshaun Watson playing like those guys because they're like linebackers out there, but a dual threat guy who you can maximize as both a runner and a passer. That's really what Ken Dorsey brings. So everything is focused on Deshaun Watson, and it makes sense because it has to work with Deshaun. There's no other options here. It has to work with Deshaun Watson as your quarterback. So you remake that offensive side of the ball with him in mind. And like I said, I think it's really interesting that you go get a guy like Tommy Rees, who I don't think Tommy Rees tight ends coach, but that's a position that sort of elevates guys. That's where Drew Petzing kind of started and worked his way up. And I think you bring that guy in because he's essentially like another quarterback's coach, too.
Yeah, and young offensive coordinator for Nick Saban in Notre Dame before that. So that, if you think about the guys that have been offensive coordinators for Nick Saban, it was Lane Kiffin, Steve Sarkisian, Bill O'Brien.
Yeah.
Tommy Rees. One of those 4 is not like, Tommy Rees is significantly younger.
Yeah, but just learning under Nick Saban, right? And learning that culture. And when you talk to players that come from Alabama, they all say the same thing. Like, we learned to be pros at Alabama because that's what that program is like. And the expectations are so high there. If you're a coordinator, if you're a player, whatever it is, Nick Saban only expects the best. So I think that's a really interesting and intriguing hire to kind of go get a guy like that and bring him in. I'm really curious kind of what he does, kind of what his ultimate role is going to be on top of coaching tight ends, what he'll end up doing within that offense. Is he a future play caller somewhere? Could he be an OC somewhere? I don't know. I'm really curious to see where he ends up.
Would you be surprised if Kevin Stefanski turns over play calling to Ken Dorsey?
I would, but I wouldn't. Nothing would surprise me with Kevin. But I think Kevin, for as much as he's always said he doesn't define himself as a play caller and play calling is exhausting, I still think he likes to call plays. Mm-hmm. And I think at his core, he wants to call plays for Deshaun Watson. And I think it's easier for him to open the season calling plays, and then if he decides that he wants to give it to Ken Dorsey, he can do that. Whereas if you say, Ken Dorsey's my play caller, and then you need to take it back, that doesn't reflect well on Dorsey. So I guess nothing would shock me on that front. But I do think Kevin at his core still wants to call plays. I mean, he always says he's going to do what's best for the organization. And by the way, what he has felt has been best for this organization for 3 years is him calling plays. And most guys, if you become a head coach in the NFL, it's because you think a lot of yourself. Most guys believe that's what's best for the organization is them doing that job. So it wouldn't shock me if he kept that.
Well, and he's been coach of the year twice. I mean,
yeah, and I think he's a good play caller.
Right. Yeah, and play calling is one of those things nobody's ever going to love a play caller in the NFL. They just aren't. Dan Labbe, Browns beat reporter with Plain cleveland.com, and I are going to step aside, take a quick time out. Other side of the break, we will continue talking Browns from the NFL Scouting Combine in Indianapolis, Indiana. Sports4CLE will be right back. Stay with us.
ahead and pop a clamp on that. Let's take 5. With one of these 5 Lady Luck scratch-offs from the Ohio Lottery, like this new $20 100X with its $1 million grand prize, I want to get my cut of that 76% payout.
So, good news. We're playing the largest family of scratch-offs ever. These Lady Lucks have all the fun and no complications.
Sports4CLE continues from the NFL Scouting Combine in Indianapolis, Indiana, along with Browns beat reporter Dan Labbe from the Plain Dealer, cleveland.com. I'm Dave Bacon. Dan, we talked a little bit about Deshaun Watson last segment. He's coming back from a significant shoulder injury. How much pressure do you think is on for him to be the guy next year that they traded for?
I mean, I think it's a ton of pressure. He's played 12 games since 2020. And, he's gone from when the Browns made that trade, well, not when they made that trade, but after that 2020 season, and before all the allegations, everybody was saying, could Deshaun Watson be in that class with the Mahomes? Is he in that top 5, top 3 even, right? He leads the league in passing yards. Get him out of Houston. Get him somewhere where he can really shine. Obviously everything happens. The Browns end up making that trade, but he hasn't been that guy since he's been here. He's only played 12 games. We've seen little flashes of it here and there. He played 2 great games against Tennessee and Arizona, and then, of course, he had the second half against Baltimore. But I think all the pressure in the world is on Deshaun right now to show that he can be that guy, and he's got to do it coming off of this serious injury. Again, the Browns don't have any other options. That's their reality. It's got to be Deshaun Watson. They have to make this work, because right now, 2 years into this trade, you can't make the argument that they've won the trade. I mean, they've lost the trade. There's not even an argument there, but they can still salvage it if he has a strong final 3 years of this deal.
You look at this roster, obviously wide receiver. What are some other areas that you think the Browns would look to upgrade?
I think defensive tackle is still a big one, because they've got some free agents there, Jordan Elliott, some guys they brought in on one-year deals. I don't know that they're going to spend a ton of money there because they already paid Dalvin Tomlinson, but I think that's an area of need. I've been looking at linebackers. Obviously, JOK is your guy there, but do they bring back Sione Takitaki? I think a low-cost athletic linebacker that fits in Jim Schwartz's scheme, I think that's an area to keep an eye on. And look, with this team, you can never have too many defensive backs. We talked about tackle. This team loves defensive backs. They're pretty good at drafting them, too. So you can never have too many defensive backs. So I kind of keep an eye there. Third safety, specifically, is, with Rodney McLeod, he was really important to this team. Do they just trust one of those undrafted guys, or do they bring in another veteran? Do they draft somebody else? I think that third safety spot is one to really keep an eye on.
So, free agency, my perception of Andrew Berry is when he's looking at a guy he likes, there's a price in mind. And he doesn't, remember last year, Draymond Jones and Hargrave, he got outbid for him. They didn't get him. It's like, well, that's one of the reasons they don't get in significant cap trouble.
Yeah, he's going to do what he thinks is right as far as cost is concerned and all of that. And he's not going to paint himself into a corner. But one thing he is going to do is he's going to address needs. When you go through the offseasons with Andrew, you can almost predict what he's going to do, because you see the needs, he sees the needs, and he's going to go address them. Because what he doesn't want to do for the most part is be in a position where he's got to address a need directly in the draft. He had to do it at left tackle a few years ago. Safety, I guess you could say, with Grant Delpit. But generally, he doesn't want to address needs and fix needs just in the draft. He wants to do it in free agency and then sort of fortify it and put that next wave of guys in line in the draft.
What do you think the second and third round picks look like? Can you guess even? Because, who would have thought a couple of years ago it was Martin Emerson and last year they didn't really need a tackle. They go and they get one that can play.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Like, it's easy to sit here and say, well, of course, you take a wide receiver with that second-round pick. But, like you mentioned Martin Emerson, nobody thought they were taking a cornerback. And, I think they wanted a different cornerback in the second round that they got jumped for. So it's really hard to predict Andrew. And he is very much a best player available guy. He doesn't want to reach for a player. So they might get to that pick. They need a wide receiver. But if they don't have a guy that fits the value of that pick, they're either going to trade out of it or they're just not going to take a wide receiver. They're going to take somebody else that matches that spot on their board. He's just not going to reach for guys. So I think you'd maybe target a wide receiver there, but who knows? Andrew Berry could take a quarterback. He could take, I don't think he would take a quarterback, but he could take a running back. I don't think there's any position necessarily or anything. I don't think you can paint him into a corner with that pick at all. He's going to take the best guy there.
When you think about the salary cap going up, do you think that drives up the price for some of the higher and even middle level guys?
I think it could, and it's interesting. A few years ago when the NBA cap ballooned, and they kind of made the mistake of just allowing it to balloon, and a bunch of guys got contracts that they probably didn't deserve. I don't know that that's going to happen necessarily in the NFL, but I do think it's going to make it a little. There's more options for guys, right? Maybe if there's a free agent out there that would have had 4 teams who could have paid him, now maybe he's got 6 or 7. So I think that's sort of where it affects things. I think maybe we see some higher numbers, but I just think it's, that's going to be driven up by more teams being able to maybe go sign a guy that otherwise they wouldn't have been able to.
The other thing is, because of the way Andrew operates, I don't think it was very interesting to hear him say that the salary cap fell within the projections of where they had it falling. That didn't surprise me.
No, of course not. And these guys know what they're doing, right? They know exactly what they're doing when they look at the cap. And he's always said, they look at the cap over multiple years. It's not just a one-year proposition, and they're so good at managing it. And, of course, Jimmy has them spending money that allows you to restructure contracts and, like Dalvin Tomlinson, they have that big deal. It doesn't really hit their cap until 2 years from now. It's a pretty low number these first 2 years of the deal. So next year, you kind of get a big number on Dalvin Tomlinson. So having owners that are willing to spend allows you to do that. And then they're so good at just looking out over the years to figure it out. So, it's not surprising. And the other thing is they're smart. I keep mentioning, I'd have loved it if they would have signed T. Higgins, but do you actually believe they would have gone and paid T. Higgins? Let's say he gets $20 million a year. I would do it, but it's not my money and not my job on the line. So I think we kind of have an idea that he's not going to go nuts spending on guys. He's going to be very targeted with what he does.
Are there any guys that you're intrigued by draft-wise? I know it's still early in the process, but the Combine, there's usually guys that...
Yeah, I'm blanking on his name now all of a sudden, but the tackle from LSU.
The big guy that's 320, Mason?
Yeah. Yes, that's it. He's a really interesting name, right? If they're going to look at a defensive tackle, and I think maybe they've met with him. So guys like that, that's kind of who you keep in mind. So I think he's really intriguing. I don't know where he's going to land, and that's part of the problem too. You just don't know who's necessarily going to be there at certain times. So he's the name that I would just sort of early on circle as a position and a name that kind of stands out to me.
So we mentioned wide receiver. This surprised me when I found out. So since 2010, Browns have drafted 1 wide receiver in the first round, 1 in the second round, and a supplemental. Corey Coleman, Greg Little, Josh Gordon. Andrew Berry has drafted 3 in the third round. It's Schwartz, Bell, and Tillman. It's a passing league. Mm-hmm. That surprises me. I would think you got to take a couple of swings higher up. Am I missing something there?
I agree, and I think I would have been very interested to see what they would have done when they made the trade for Deshaun, what they would have done with the 13th pick that year. Now, there was a run on receivers early that I don't know if those guys would have fallen to them. But I'd have been curious to see what they would have done there. And that's sort of the cost you paid, right? When you decided to trade all those picks, if he becomes a franchise quarterback, you do it every single time. But there is a cost that comes with that. You don't get a chance at some of these high-caliber wide receivers in the first round. It is a hole, though, in Andrew Berry's resume. And when you go back to when he was here with Sashi Brown, they really didn't do well drafting receivers. Yeah. Whether it was high or low, they just couldn't figure it out. And he hasn't been able to figure it out here during his time as GM. And that's why you go and trade, again, that's why you use trade assets, right? I'm going to take the second-round pick. I don't know what's going to be there. I don't know what that guy's going to develop into, but I really like Elijah Moore. So I'm going to go get him. And I think that's how Andrew views it, is I'm going to use some of these day 2, day 3 picks. If I feel like there's a more sure thing, that doesn't cost a ton of money, and I can give up a day 2 or 3 pick that I don't know what it's going to be. I'm going to go get the sure thing.
Would you expect would it surprise you if they make another trade? Because it seems like every year there's a couple of, it was Moore, it was Cooper, Zadarius Smith was a trade.
Yeah, and I think they're going to. I absolutely think if they add a receiver, honestly, I almost feel like maybe it would be in a trade. And part of that is you're trading for a guy who's already under contract. That's big, so you're not bidding, dealing with a guy that you're bidding up to $20 or $25 million. The thing about Elijah Moore, he was on his rookie deal, so there was value there, and I think that's something that Andrew's going to look for. So, look, they could sign a Gabe Davis, they could sign one of these guys, but it would not shock me if the league year starts and the big acquisition we're talking about is, they traded, again, like they did for Amari Cooper, they traded for a receiver.
Before I let you go, running back position, do you think they need to add, Nick Chubb, if anybody can come back from that, it's Nick Chubb. Mm-hmm. But I don't know that you can necessarily, stake your running game on that.
Yeah, and some of it's about roles, right? So we talked about Elijah Moore earlier. I don't like Elijah Moore as your 2. I love him as your slot guy or your 3. I don't know if I like Jerome Ford as my workhorse back, if that's what you need to do with Chubb coming back, but I love him as like my 2 or my 3. I love him in that Kareem Hunt role, catching the ball out of the backfield. So, yes, I would add a running back. Whether that's in the draft, whether that's in free agency, I would, Jerick McKinnon, older guy, has been versatile though. He's performed in the passing game. Could you get a guy like that on the cheap? That's what I would look to do. Try to find some value on the veteran running back market. Somebody who's versatile, sort of a Kareem Hunt type. Maybe you bring Kareem Hunt back. I don't know. He didn't sound like a guy that was going to be back at the end of the year, but these things change. I would add a running back for sure.
Dan Labbe, Browns beat reporter, playing daily at cleveland.com. As always, appreciate the time and the insight. Thanks very much, Dan.
Yep, no problem. Thank you.
Make sure you check him out, Dan Labbe. Always really good Browns coverage in the pages of the Plain Dealer and on cleveland.com. Sports4CLE from the NFL Scouting Combine in Indianapolis will continue on the other side of the break. We will hear from Nathan Zegura from the Browns Radio Network. That's straight ahead on Sports4CLE. Stay with us.
Come back to go forward. Back to learning new things. Back to pursuing your dreams. Tri-C has flexible learning options to fit your life. And every year, more than 1,000 local companies provide Tri-C students with real-world learning. The right education can boost your lifetime earning power by hundreds of thousands of dollars. Start now with a college education you can afford. Tri-C, where futures begin.
Sports4CLE continues from the NFL Scouting Combine in Indianapolis, Indiana. The prospects will take center stage in a couple of days, but we are pleased to be joined by one of the voices of the Browns, Nathan Zegura, from the Browns Radio Network, also Cleveland Browns Daily. Nathan, when you look at this offseason, what are the Browns attacking? What are they doing?
Well, they got to answer some questions about not only the salary cap, but kind of how they're going to construct this roster. And Andrew Berry, we're going to hear from him speaking here at the Combine this week, about how maybe they're going to attack those things, because you've got to clear some space, probably have to restructure a couple of contracts, and then you've got some rooms where you're in a really good spot, and then other rooms where you've got a lot of free agents. And you go on the defensive side of the ball, you're good on the back end. Your corners are very good. You'd like to bring Mike Ford back because he played a nice role for you on special teams. Pretty good in the safety room. Of course, you'd love to see if Rodney McLeod is healthy, bring him back as well. But at the linebacking position, you really have Mahmoud Diabate, Tony Fields, and Jeremiah Wusu-Kormo is the only ones coming back. Sione Takitaki's a free agent. Anthony Walker Jr. is a free agent. And so you're going to have to, make some moves in that room to kind of fill that out. And then the other one is really up front in the defensive tackle room. Dalvin Tomlinson and Siaki Ika are the only guys that are under contract for next year. Jordan Elliott is a free agent. Maurice Hurst is a free agent. Shelby Harris is a free agent. And so Andrew Berry, I think, is going to have to do some work on those spots.
The salary cap increased significantly.
Yeah, it's good. Great.
Million. Now, it's not everybody gets that, so you would expect some of the free agent contracts to probably rise a little bit. Andrew Berry has shown in the past there's a line for each of the free agents that he doesn't go over. That seems to play to a strength.
Yeah, he's been great at it, and he's been very good at also finding trades. It's how we got Amari Cooper, and so I would expect Andrew Berry to continue to employ the methods that have allowed him to be very successful. And like I said, you've got to make some moves. Deshaun's numbers we know is so big. There's a lot of talk about Nick Chubb and what that's going to look like. And my guess is there will be some type of a restructured contract there. I think people talking about Nick Chubb being released. I would be absolutely stunned. I don't think that is in the cards at all. They want him to be here. He wants to be here. So. Yeah, there are going to be some moves that have to be made, but that's something they've been very good at. And they plan many, many years out so that they can get this salary cap manageable to keep fielding a very competitive team.
When you look at some of the areas that they might look to add, does receiver strike a chord with you? I mean, it seems like it is just because you want to give Watson every opportunity to succeed.
Yeah, I think you still need that kind of field stretcher at the wide receiver position, and whether that comes via the draft or whether that comes via free agency, I think the Browns will look there. Gabe Davis with the hiring of Ken Dorsey, a guy who makes a lot of sense, averages about 17 yards a catch, 6'4", so he's a big body type as well. Hollywood Brown could be a name as a guy who could absolutely fly. So we'll see. I think they will look in free agency to try to add that speed element. But, I think they also like their room quite a bit. Amari is excellent. Went to the Pro Bowl career high last year, set the record for the most yards in a single game. They like Elijah Moore a lot, and I think as the season went on and they started to use him more as a traditional receiver, you saw him in the game that Amari didn't play against the Jets. Elijah Moore was great before he got hurt in that one. They do like Cedric Tillman. David Bell showed some flashes over the final month of the season, and so it's a room I think they like, but I think they're missing that one vertical component, and there are a lot of ways to attack that, but I do think they will.
You look at the changes that they made on the offensive staff. You brought in Ken Dorsey as the offensive coordinator. Tommy Rees is an intriguing guy. He was an OC at Alabama as a young guy, which is out of character for Nick Saban. And then Andy Dickerson on the offensive line. What do you think the offense looks like moving forward? I know that's the million-dollar question.
Yeah, I just think that they're going to – we know what Kevin Stefanski does really well, right, with that kind of the outside zone, the marriage of the run and pass, and you saw how effective that was with a guy like Joe Flacco. Deshaun's probably more comfortable in the shotgun than he is under center. Now, he certainly can do that, and I'm sure they'll continue to keep some of those components. But you bring in Ken Dorsey because Ken Dorsey worked with Cam Newton. Ken Dorsey worked with Josh Allen. Now, they're physically bigger than Deshaun, but they played in shotgun, spread offenses, RPO game, dual threat quarterback. That's his specialty. And so I think he was brought in to bring some of those elements. Dickerson is a very well-regarded offensive line coach. Spent a lot of time with Sean McVay with the Rams before going to Seattle. He, in fact, was the first person we interviewed for our offensive coordinator job. So, and I've talked to some of the players. Obviously, you never want to lose a guy like Bill Callahan, but he's going to coach with his son. Of course, he's going to go to Tennessee. But the players are excited about Dickerson. So I think it's going to look in some ways similar, but you're going to see a lot more of Deshaun Watson doing things that maybe he's done in the past where he's very successful.
Combine is really the beginning of kind of the preparation, the in-depth preparation for the draft. What position groups have you heard that kind of stand out that might be targets? And I know Andrew Berry doesn't roll that way, but targets late in the second round where the Browns are likely to take.
Yeah, that'll be interesting. I was just talking with Daniel Jeremiah. I think defensive tackle, we talked about it. You got two guys coming back. That's a position where you might want to get a premium young guy. Now, they have tried drafting defensive tackles from Elliott to Tommy Togiai, Perion Winfrey, Siaki Ika. It hasn't necessarily panned out just yet, but that's a position I could see them attacking. I think that you feel real good about where you are in the cornerback room. You can never have too many tackles, as we know we went down to 5 last year, but you've got basically 3 starting tackles for 2 spots. I do think they could draft a tackle. That one surprised me a little bit as succession planning, to think that, you can't pay Jack Conklin, Jed Wills, Joel Bitonio, Whitetail, and Ethan Posick forever, and DeJuan Jones at some point is going to get paid as well, but only going to his second season. So I could see, he said it was a great offensive tackle draft. Defensive tackle, I could see them going there, and then obviously always wide receiver, right? And I do think Jerome Ford was very good this year. Pierre Strong showed some flashes. I would have liked to have seen more of him. I like his burst. But that could be a position the Browns are looking at, round 2, round 3, maybe pulling in another running back, just to be realistic about the future.
You look at that defense, Jim Schwartz, his first year. Heck, he won, assistant coach of the year at the NFL Honors. is it realistic to expect him to get better? Because it was the first year in a new system.
Yeah, I think it is. And because you've got all the components. You've got the great pass rusher, the defensive player of the year, Myles Garrett. I thought Alex Wright really came on nicely at the end of last year. Obo played well when he was healthy. I think they could still add somebody into that room. You got to shore up that interior, but JOK's become one of the best off-ball linebackers in the NFL. You've got the 3 corners. You've got excellent safeties. So you've got stars at all 3 levels. When you have that, and you've got great man corners, and you got guys who get the quarterback, I think this defense can be elite. And I think as good as it was, there were inconsistencies that need to be cleaned up. They were not as good on the road as they were at home. They were not great in the red zone or in goal-to-go situations. So there are still areas for this defense to improve, and I think that should be exciting for Browns fans.
Yeah, and you would expect year 2 with a lot of guys returning. You just understand it. It's more of a reaction.
Sure, play faster.
When you look at Zadarius Smith, that's a guy, I know he didn't have the eye-popping sack numbers, but Myles Garrett was Defensive Player of the Year because he was on that line along with Okoronkwo and Tomlinson. Do you think the Browns would like him back, and how likely is it that he comes back?
I think they would like him back. I think he is a very, very tough guy and probably played through some things that maybe people weren't privy to. And his sack numbers were down, but his quarterback hits were there, his pressures were there. And he made some huge plays. Think about the Colts game. You think about the Steelers game, chasing down Jaylen Warren on that screen. If he doesn't do that, maybe we don't beat the Steelers. So Zadarius Smith loved him. The locker room loved him. I thought when I got a chance to talk to him, I was very, very impressed by him. I would love to see him back. It's just going to be a matter of it's money, it's dollars and cents. Alex Wright had a sack in 4 straight games to close out the season. Do they feel like he could be that guy? That's what he's drafted to be, right? They knew it was going to take about a year and a half coming out of Alabama, Birmingham. So maybe they feel like instead of a big name there, we got Alex, we got Obo. Maybe we sign a guy like Derek Barnett, former first rounder of the Eagles. Went to Houston last year with Jacques Césaire, who's now our defensive line coach, and all of a sudden had the best stretch of his career in that defense. So I would love to have Zadarius back. I think it's just going to be you can't have everybody, unfortunately. When you get a good team and a good roster, those are some of the tough decisions that Andrew Berry's got to make.
All right, before I let you go, we mentioned earlier salary cap up $30.5 million. Do you expect some ridiculous contracts to come out of that, or is it everybody kind of has seen, man, you can't go crazy because eventually it catches up to you?
It does, and at the same time, it feels something that is very malleable, and if you plan for it well, there are a lot of mechanisms at your disposal. I think that's one of the things that the Browns and Andrew Berry and Chris Cooper do very well, is take advantage of those things so they can keep fielding a competitive team. You're going to see some big contracts, obviously, because it is ultimately an open market and bidding occurs to get certain players, but it's just kind of the trend. This is the most popular sport, certainly in this country. Soccer is probably the most popular sport in the world, but this is the behemoth. It's still crazy, and I realize it's very different, and they play 16 games versus that baseball players are making more money than NFL players. At some point, that's probably not going to be the case anymore, and so you're just seeing that natural, I think, evolution. It's the number one sport. It's the number one game in town, number one in TV ratings. You just saw what they did in the Super Bowl this year. So, yeah, there's plenty of money in the NFL, and I'm sure players will be getting it, and owners are getting it as well.
Nathan Zegura, analyst for the Browns, Browns Radio Network, as well as Browns Daily, as always. Thanks so much for the time.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Appreciate it very much.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Nathan Zegura, always really insightful Browns coverage. Sports4CLE will be right back from the NFL Scouting Combine in Indianapolis, Indiana. Stay with us. The Ohio Lottery Partners in Education program is dedicated to recognizing exceptional students, teachers, and schools throughout Ohio. Scan the QR code on screen to nominate students and teachers as Academic All-Stars and Teachers of the Month. They must be currently enrolled or teach in grades K through 12. Is your K through 12 school developing students' literacy skills to achieve success in reading? If so, you can nominate your school for the School of the Year. Students can win $100, teachers can win $500, and schools can win $2,500. Scan the QR code, fill out the forms, and nominate deserving students, teachers, and schools today. The Ohio Lottery Partners in Education program takes pride in honoring exceptional students, teachers, and schools across Ohio. Submit your nomination today. It's fun, fast, and free. Sports4CLE continues from the NFL Scouting Combine in Indianapolis, Indiana. The scouting world and the NFL world here as the draft continues for the NFL. We're pleased to be joined by Brad Spielberger, officially now a friend of the show from Pro Football Focus. Brad, salary cap, it goes up $30 million. What does that do to free agency?
Yeah, it's a big deal, right? I think teams initially, early this season, were planning for about $245. Then they got some optimism, $250. Comes in at $255. You said $30 million jump, 13.6%, which is the biggest jump of the modern salary cap era. And look, the thing is, it obviously raises franchise tags, it raises the asking prices from free agents. But I think what's going to happen is a lot of those top-of-market guys will get bigger deals. There may still be some values in the mid-tier and lower tier, which we assume is more where Cleveland's going to be operating. So, yeah, it kind of balances out because, supply, both sides of the coin are happy about it. But certainly benefits Cleveland. Maybe one fewer restructured contract, something like that, and gives them more flexibility.
When you look at what areas of free agency you think the Browns will be involved in, what comes to mind?
To me, it's depth receiver, like a wide receiver 4. We give some examples, like a Kendrick Bourne came out this week. He's not going to go back to New England, most likely. Guy that's a willing blocker, I think would fit in the scheme, can play inside, outside, good hands, good route runner. I think it's 2 years 12, 2 years 14 type of deal. Josh Reynolds, I know Josh Reynolds did not have the greatest NFC Championship game. It's funny, I tell you his story. Like, he was so money for them on third downs, possession guy, good wide receiver 4, locker room leader, very willing blocker on bubble screens and on running plays. But I know the game wasn't great. But he's a very, very good player. Like that type of marketed receiver, and then interior defender as well.
What about a guy like a Gabe Davis? People are connecting the dots relative to Ken Dorsey, the new offensive coordinator. What do you think that contract looks like for Gabe Davis?
Yeah, I think he's interesting, where I think a one-year flyer might be the move they go, right? Misses the end of the season, doesn't play in the playoffs. He is a guy that, he was already in a great offense at Buffalo with a great quarterback and never really broke out. But you saw he posted a bunch of things on Instagram about, his role wasn't as big as he would like it to be. He kind of has some shades of a Donovan Peoples-Jones and a Tillman as a big-body, deep threat, but I think is a better long separator, long speed guy. Not the greatest laterally and like working over the middle of the field, but again, a willing blocker. His teammates were saying he has some dog in him, and he's like a gritty guy that would fit from that standpoint. But yeah, he's one of the better, 18, 20-yard downfield, catchers. We've seen it for his entire career.
You mentioned a one-year flyer might be what he does because the production, and he's coming off a little bit of an injury. Any thoughts of what numbers were you looking at with that?
I think like 9 to 12 range, somewhere in there. Like 1 year, like a Will Fuller type deal was $10 million, $10.5 million a couple of years ago, coming out of Houston, same kind of profile, right? Like a clearly talented player that had big game production, even playoff production, but some injury issues, some, at times like disappearing for weeks at a time. And Gabe Davis is a good football player, but there was that, even when healthy this year, like 0 catch games out there. So I think you build your market back up, go to another good team. We know Deshaun Watson loves throwing the ball downfield. Like, I think it's a good fit. Yeah, 9 to 12. Hope you cash out, after a great year.
When you look at interior defenders, who are some of the? I think the Browns would probably love to have Maurice Hurst and Shelby Harris back. Are those possibilities to get on one? They got them 1 year and they got them reasonably cheap. Do you think they can do that again?
I do. I think both guys are looking at similar markets. Hurst was great this year. And the talent is obvious, and against the run and as a interior pass rusher. But the injuries are always going to kind of keep his market down, just because there is inherent risk he could be lost for the season, and obviously had the heart issues coming out of college anyway. So I think both of those guys could come back for the same price. I would also look into Quentin Jefferson had a great year with the Jets. Same kind of profiles as Shelby Harris, a good interior pass rusher, not as good against the run, but a better get upfield in a hurry. If you have Dalvin Tomlinson pushing the pocket, you have Myles Garrett being Myles Garrett. Ideally Za'Darius as well. Quentin's a guy that's going to finish plays. He's going to get sacks, get that production. One more name, too. I think Danico Autry's interesting. Can play 5-tech, can play on the inside. Was phenomenal in Tennessee. I think he'd be just like a perfect fit in Cleveland's defense.
Well, the other thing is Tennessee, that draws some ties to Jim Schwartz as well. What about edge? Do you think does Za'Darius Smith get a significant increase in money that might price him out of the Browns, or do you think there's a chance that they get him back?
I actually don't think so. I think it's actually going to be a very similar market again. The revised deal was like 1 year 11. My projection is 224 for him. I know the sacks weren't there, but he's always been a guy for the underlying stuff. The pressures, the pass rush win rate was sky high for us. And again, Schwartz, the ability to move him on the inside on pass rushing downs, move him all over the formation. But no, I think it's kind of the same market.
How big of a factor do you think were the guys like LaDainian Tomlinson, Zadarius Smith, Alex Wright you mentioned, Harris Hurst, to helping Myles Garrett take that final step and get the Defensive Player of the Year. They upgraded that line.
No doubt about it. Agbakorankwo, like a lot of the pieces they brought in that just demanded attention from opponents. Like Myles is going to get chipped more than anyone, going to get double teamed more than anyone in the NFL, which he still did last year, but it did come down a bit for us, about 8% I think from the year prior, which is meaningful, right? So it definitely helped. He obviously did a lot on his own, and also Jim Schwartz too, just moving him around more. Like we all know the highlight of him, crossing up in the A gap and doing different things, but he needed some cohorts around him. Dalvin Tomlinson too, like pushing the pocket in the interior, it made a big difference.
When you look at year 2 of a defensive system, so the Browns were really good under Jim Schwartz. It was the first year in a new system. Is it reasonable to expect them to be better because it is year 2?
I think it's entirely possible, right? I don't think you should doubt that. I mean, Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah got more and more comfortable as the year went on. I think he was doing more reading and reacting in early years, and Jim just wants him to just go, right? Like you saw the linebackers in Tennessee, it was like, just take off. That's why they bring in like an Azeez Al-Shaair there. But in the past, like Zach Cunningham and some of those guys, they were just flying to the football. And I think as Jock played more and more and got comfortable with that, it got better. So, yeah, I think so.
You look at the offensive line. I'm switching sides of the ball on you. At tackle, they've got 3 guys that are likely starters. The question is, can they be healthy? And how does that shake out? The other thing that I'd like to talk about, Jed Wills. How does he grade out? There are a number of Browns fans that I think are comparing him to Joe Thomas and looking at him being the 10th overall pick. And to me, he's a average left tackle at this point.
It is one of the funnier conundrums or tough things with watching football, that finding an average starting left tackle doesn't sound exciting. Very hard to do. 32 teams in the NFL would take an average starting left tackle tomorrow. And so you're not going to have first ballot Hall of Fame tackle play. And Joe Thomas is one of the best to ever do it. A tough guy to comp to. I agree. It's one of those where the people that are too low on him are too low. People that are too high probably too high. He's a solid starter. The health is a problem, though, right? If you're going to be not the greatest player, at least be available. But yeah, he's not as bad as some Browns fans probably think he is. He's a starting caliber left tackle.
When you look at DeJuan Jones, what does the future hold for him? Certainly they were right on him. Got him in the 4th round, and he was on a number of all-rookie teams.
The upside's enormous. I mean, coming out of Ohio State, we knew for his size, his ability to move in space was not normal. And his pass pro, clean pass sets, good use of his hands. He knows when to punch or be patient. There was a lot of good tape there from him. But we know tackle is one of the hardest adjustments in the entire NFL, and he should only get better. Obviously, you lose Bill Callahan, but they'll figure things out there. The sky is the limit for DeJuan Jones.
All right, before I let you go, we're at the Combine, so the beginning of the draft process. When you look at this year's draft, what areas are deep? And, the Browns don't have a pick till the 2nd round, 3rd and 4th, so that's kind of where they're going to have to find their developmental guys. What areas are deep that they might be looking to in those spots?
Yeah, I think everyone's talking about receiver, but it's worth it. It's one of the best receiver classes, not only at the top, but also throughout the entire draft. You're going to get starting caliber guys 3rd, 4th, 5th round. I think corner is quietly deep as well. Maybe not as many first rounders as years past. I think you'll get maybe 3 of them, but a lot of good players there that I like. A lot of high upside guys. Kyrie Jackson, Oregon's a guy I'm super high on. So I would say those 2 spots, I think you're going to get good players later on.
All right, I lied. One more question. Some areas that aren't nearly as deep. And because of NIL and those things, the later rounds, people are saying they're not as many players because they're choosing to stay in school.
It's a topic of conversation that they think it's one of the worst 6th and 7th round drafts in a while. Maybe the fewest underclassmen declares. I don't know about ever, but a very long time. I've never seen that floating around. I wish I knew who said that. But like you said, COVID eligibility, transfer, all that, you get this extra eligibility. There are teams that apparently are going to try to just trade for a future 6th with their 7th or whatever, stuff like that, because there's just not depth there. In particular, position-wise, I think linebacker and running back, there's just not a lot of answers there.
Brad Spielberger, Pro Football Focus, a friend of the show.
Yes.
Appreciate the time and the insight. Make sure you check him out. Pro Football Focus, Brad Spielberger. Always really good stuff with the Browns, free agency, and the entire NFL. We're going to step aside, take a quick time out. We continue with Sports4CLE from the NFL Scouting Combine in Indianapolis, Indiana. It's where the draft starts.
All right, everybody. Let's take 5. With one of these 5 Lady Luck scratch-offs from the Ohio Lottery.
Like the $5 25X. It's a nice way to nab up to 150 grand.
The Lady Luck family of scratch-offs is the Ohio Lottery's first ever, with 5 price points from $1 to 20. They're an easy way to break into some fun.
Sports4CLE continues from the NFL Scouting Combine in Indianapolis, Indiana. Plenty of the local reaction to what's going on with the Browns here at the Scouting Combine in Indianapolis. We're going to turn things to a national thing from SiriusXM NFL channel. The opening drive, the host, Solomon Wilcots. Solomon, you were a defensive back. Let's talk defense with the Browns. How much fun would you have had playing in Jim Schwartz's system?
Look, it's a lot of fun because you know what they're doing. A great job hitting the quarterback, turning the quarterback over. No defense is better over this last season at keeping the points down and off the scoreboard and taking the ball away. And then a great pass rush, one of the best defensive players, the defensive player of the year in Myles Garrett. So, no, I would have had a lot of fun. We always say pressure leads to picks. So when you're getting that kind of pressure, defensive backs, we can get our hands on the ball. So I would have loved it.
So first year in the system for the Browns under Jim Schwartz. Is it realistic to expect them to be even better in year 2?
No, I think it's on par to expect growth, to expect production and improvement on the defense when you've been in the same system with the same coaches. The fact that they hit the ground running as well as they did 1 year ago upon implementing a brand new defense, I thought that spoke to the talent that they have. I think it speaks to Coach Schwartz, his ability to communicate and get guys to buy into what you want to do defensively. And now they can begin to build upon that. When you have experience in the same system, and now you know the nuances of the defense, know what to expect game in and game out, and I think they'll be that much better.
When you look at the offensive side of the ball, they started four quarterbacks won games. They actually started 5. How impressed were you with what Kevin Stefanski did? I know he won Coach of the Year, but when you look at it as a former player.
It's impossible to play at that level, particularly inside the AFC North Division, where it's so hotly contested and so competitive with 4 teams. Any one of them could have won the division. And then when you lose your starting quarterback in Deshaun Watson, then you have to go to a second quarterback who's a rookie, then a third quarterback, and then you end up going to the playoffs with a guy, and Joe Flacco was sitting on the couch at the beginning of the season when you went into training camp. I think it's a testament to Kevin Stefanski, him as a coach, but then the system that they operate in. I think it's a testament to the other players on this roster that they could continue to be so productive despite who's playing quarterback. Now if you can get some stability there, just think how good this team can really be.
That Browns fans and anybody that talks about the Browns always talks about Deshaun Watson. What did you see when you saw him on the field?
First of all, I am a huge Deshaun Watson fan. I saw a quarterback and a player that brought in some rust from the previous season. There's no way you can miss as much time as he has over the last 3 seasons and not develop some rust. And it's still, I think, even going into 2024, it's going to take some time for that rust to wear off and for him to get back to being the quarterback that we saw in 2020. I think we saw a glimpse of it last year. He was starting to play at a really high level, and then he gets hurt, and then he's unable to play. Even when he did play in those final games, he was playing hurt. He was injured, shoulder injury. I couldn't imagine how he must have been feeling once I saw the diagnosis of what that injury all entailed, and then to see the way that he was playing. So I think we started to see some glimpses of the old Deshaun Watson. I think if he can stay on the field and stay healthy, I think as the season progresses, he's only going to get better.
There have been a lot of lean years, so perception of the Browns league-wide, there's the Browns as the Browns. Yeah. Is that changing? You're all over the NFL. What is the perception of the Browns?
The perception is that Andrew Berry has built one heck of a roster, right? You're talking about an offensive line that at one point lost 3 of their 5 starters and still continue to have one of the best running games despite losing Nick Chubb in the early part of the season. They were still able to run the ball with great authority. They were still able to throw the ball once they were competent with a veteran quarterback like Joe Flacco. They were still able to play at a very high level offensively. And then you saw the wide receiving core. You saw David Njoku become one of the best tight ends in the game with his ability to make plays. So what you did, you got to see who the players are and what the talent looks like outside of the quarterback position. We tend to focus on that and not look at the rest of the football team. And I think the Cleveland Browns can sit here and say they have a really good team capable of winning a division title. And if you can win the AFC North division title, you could compete for a Super Bowl. That's how good the division is.
Solomon Wilcots, he is the host of the Opening Drive, SiriusXM, the NFL channel. Thanks so much for the time and the insight. Appreciate it very much, Solomon.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
That's Solomon Wilcots telling you what the perception is nationally of the Browns. That'll do it for this edition of Sports for CLE. We will be back here at the NFL Scouting Combine tomorrow at 4 o'clock. Have a great night, everybody. See you tomorrow at 4 on Sports for CLE.